Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, and I've been wondering if they missed a trick when making the film of the life of Rapunzel known as Tangled, but they didn't include a song called Mine Hair. Just a bit of homonym fun there. Well, funnily enough, or maybe not funnily, depending on choice, but funnily enough, the word mine is going to be pretty much what we're going to be talking about today. Now, when you hear the word mine, it's not the first thing you associate with musical theatre. I've cheated a bit when I mentioned Mine Hair. Obviously, it's not in Tangled, but it is a song from the film version of Cabaret, which was so successful that it's now incorporated into most stage versions of that Candour and Ebb musical. But actually, I can think of two other examples where the word mine has featured in a popular musical. It was the name of a hit song from the George Gershwin musical Let 'Em Eat Cake from 1933, which was the sequel to Of Thee I Sing. That, of course, is mine as in a possession. And having mentioned Tangled already, we should probably never forget that in the first significant Walt Disney musical film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs are miners. And so the song Hi-Ho, as in hi-ho, hi-ho, it's off to work we go, is a mining song. And just to make the circle complete, did you know that on the success of Snow White, Walt Disney first turned his attention to making a musical animated version of the Rapunzel story, but then gave it up and went elsewhere? And it took Disney, as a film company, quite a long time to work out how to make that film in the end. So there are a few resonances for the word mine when it comes to musical theatre. But today we're going to be concentrating on a show which is called Mine. In fact, its full title is Mine, a solo ghost story musical. And it was a show that you could have seen at last year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, that's 2023, because it was presented by the person who wrote it, the incredibly talented and incredibly charming Asher Muldoon. Now, Asher describes himself as a writer, actor, composer and comedian, and he is multi-talented in all those spheres, and his show Mine really showcases his incredible abilities in all four of those areas. And if you're thinking that you might have heard the name Asher Muldoon before, it's not impossible, because he spent over a year on the first national tour of the Tony Award-winning musical Dear Evan Hanson in America. And he already has over a decade of experience of performing on stage and screen. He's an incredibly talented man. But it's his show Mine, a solo ghost story musical, which so impressed me in Edinburgh last year, I gave it 5 stars and called it a masterpiece of storytelling, that we're going to be concentrating on today. And so it's only fair that I tell you what the show's about. This is the official blurb from the website. On a whim, a young businessman buys the deed to a ghost town in the California desert, hoping to turn it into a tourist attraction. What he finds instead is a place steeped in gruesome histories and an old caretaker who can tell him just about every terrible thing that's ever happened in Burnham Mines. And what's more, he's beginning to hear voices calling him into the hungry maw of the mining cave at the edge of town, voices that carry the promise of gold. Now, it's quite an impressive feat for any single person to do a musical on their own, not just to write it, but to perform it. But when that musical is also a ghost story, you have to generate a very particular kind of atmosphere. And if you've also implanted huge amounts of dark, delicious humour, then being able to get that across as well in the atmosphere of a ghost story is something amazing, and if you can do it, you are a remarkable performer. Well, I'm pleased to be able to report that Asher Muldoon is a remarkable performer. He impressed me with his presence on stage. He impressed me with his storytelling. He impressed me with his songwriting. And overall, he impressed me as a person, because not only was he fantastic on the stage, that when he and I met to record the interview that you're about to hear, we chatted for ages about a whole raft of other bits and pieces before we even started the recording. He was an intelligent, witty, clever, charming, absolutely lovely man, and it was my great pleasure to spend time in his company. And I hope in just a minute that you'll feel the same way when you'll hear the conversation that we had about Asher Muldoon's fantastic musical, Mine, a solo ghost story musical. But before we hear that conversation, let's hear one of the songs from the score of that show, which is called Go West, Young Man.
Hold for the mesa to awaken. Up come crags and crannies from the dirt red sea. Cold has no effect on tint or shadow. Like the world has made itself look good for me. Some reprieve from my tiny frame of reference is all I'm looking for. Is it naive for me to wonder if the world could be like this but more? Better you go west, young man. Better you go west, young man. I'm so tired of the sea of 2D faces. Is it asking too much to want something real? So I'll hide in the great wide open spaces, at least till humankind can figure out its deal. Just to drive over the beltway to the Badlands where the air is clear. I can survive with a couple sets of clothes and what I got up here. Better you go west, young man. Better you go west, young man. Better you go west, young man.
My name is Asher Muldoon. I am the writer and performer of Mine, which is a solo musical ghost story at the Edinburgh Fringe 2023.
Now, I'm going to start by laying out my cards on the table by saying I really enjoyed your show.
Oh, thank you.
It is described as a solo musical, and it is you on the stage alone, and you are telling a story, and you are then singing songs to help illustrate that story. That is a very reductive way of looking at what you've done. You've done very much more than that. I'm going to start by saying I think you're a marvellous, I think you're a supreme, a sublime storyteller.
Oh, thank you.
It's very clear to me that you very quickly know how to weave an atmosphere, and that's so important, particularly with a ghost story. And yet I think you undersell yourself, because it's more than a ghost story. It has lots of dark humour in it, and there are lots of different directions. In fact, I think you said yesterday when we were talking initially that you describe it as having three halves.
Yes, it's one half ghost story, one half musical, one half stand-up, which is my pitch on the mile when I go up to strangers and I say... I had a very funny experience the other day where at some press event where I went up to a press person and I said, "Hey, do you like ghost stories?" And she said, "No."
Oh, honest but blunt.
Do you like stand-up? No. Do you like musicals? said, well, I don't know if we're going to get anywhere with this.
Good day to you.
Yeah, good day to you. But also, why are you here? I mean, those are sort of the three things that are here. Not to be reductive of the Fringe, but I mean, part of the reason we submitted this show is that it felt like a cross-section of things that the Fringe would like. On the Venn diagram of what's available, it fits very firmly in the overlap of several circles. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. But I would like to talk, I'd like to ask about how it came to be, and then how you came to pitch your performance and, all the honing and work on it, because it's clearly a thought-through, it's a delicious piece. But I want to start with the very first word. Mine. Now, this, it seems to me, and you're going to say, oh no, you've missed 7 other meanings, but there's at least 3 meanings of mine here, in action, once again on your lovely Venn diagram of semantics, haha. There is a mine. There is an actual gold mine. This is the core of the ghost story in some senses. And we're all, even in Britain, we're all familiar with the ghost town concept, and the Wild West is still something we're aware of conceptually, although through many cultural iterations which have probably watered down the idea. But yes, but there's a mine at the heart of this. And it's a physical location, and it's physically referred to in the text, in the sense that, as a character you go there repeatedly. Then there's mine, as in your character owns it. It's the purchase of this land around and of the mine which carries the story, is the dynamic of... you literally drive there, but it is the driver of the story. And then, of course, and without giving too much away, like a lot of ghost stories, one of the tropes is possession. And mine is an ownership thing, and this is the ownership of the owner. So it seems to me you've got at least 3 meanings for a single word before we get into the rest of everything. And I think that's amazing and rather wonderful. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was very... I mean, I'm a big fan of titles that do that, and I'll always pitch, even when I'm collaborating, I will always pitch one-word titles with multiple meanings because I think they're fun. I would like to throw one more in there, which is that it's a touch more oblique, but the fact that the main character is, in fact, a crypto guy. And what crypto guys do is they mine for cryptocurrency. Oh, of course, that is the terminology, isn't it? Which is just... It's actually something I didn't realize until way after I had written the show, but... There is a certain sense of the crypto people are the current day gold rush folks, or South Sea bubble, but I accept the reference to the mines better. Yes. Yeah, and you go in hoping that you put a lot of money into getting something out of this mine or this this limited resource, but there's not always the guarantee that it will be worth anything. So that's also something that's sort of in mine. As we think about something you have been mining. Quite. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, in which case, that's at least 4, and I suspect there's the central meanings plus the resonances, aren't there? There's the echo meanings and things like that. And I say it was just beautiful to think that even before one gets into the auditorium, there are levels being offered to you. Obviously, you don't know what they are until you get in, and that the intimacy and the storytelling, everything comes to life in a tangible way. So let's ask the question. So how did mine come to be? So mine was inspired by a New York Post article that I read during COVID. There was a guy who bought a ghost town in the California desert. He's still there. He's still alive. Oh, right. Jolly good. He's still doing fine. But he has been through quite a lot out there. He was hit with a snowstorm, and he was hit with the part of the town burned down, and he's on his own. He was on his own. He was out there. He's the fire service. Yes, he was out there right at the beginning of COVID, so he was just actually very alone. And there were some things in this article where he was talking about how, there's ghosts here, and I hear these 2 children in my closet when I go to sleep, and they're talking to me, and I just thought, wow, what? Well done on going to sleep. Good holiday, yeah. I just felt wow, that's such a cool setup. It's such a cool setup of why would you want to go there, and why would you? Because I'm a very scared person. I'm scared of everything. So I could never imagine wanting to go to a ghost town alone and own it, and then try to disturb it. Yes. Because clearly the people, the whatever has been there for a while likes it the way it is. So that's where it came from. And then, it was also writing that during COVID. There was a lot of, isolation, and so some of the songs came about from that time before I even knew what the plot was going to be. So that's a thematic
sense that you got. So so in a way you were weaving the thematic tapestry before you wrote the story onto it.
Yes. They really were there to signify going from a young man setting out to find his fortune, which, the opening song takes that quote, the "Go West, young man," which I think I first heard in The Dead, the James Joyce story. There's a reference to it. So I came to it, that very American phrase by way of Ireland, as I often do, because my father is Irish and my mom is American.
But you're right, but it has a global currency as well. Yeah.
But just that feeling of setting that tone of manifest destiny very early on in the show was very important. And then at the end, there's this, without giving too much away, there's a sense of like release of the self into whatever thing is here. So just setting those benchmarks very early on was important to me. And then the other songs, they're more sort of abstract and they sort of fill in what's happening.
They build an atmosphere.
Yeah.
They also delineate time passing in some senses. There's the sleep song, which is reprised.
Yeah.
And that's actually quite helpful, particularly as we, the audience, are learning about the town through your character.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not just, obviously you're a very nicely humble man, but I think your work is doing stronger work than you're allowing yourself to tell us. And, they're also very, I don't know what the word would be. Is it American folk? There's something about them which fits the story, but there's something about them which is also engaging and accessible to those of us who are not American, let's be honest. Let's start with that, but also, don't have that connection with wide open spaces.
Sure.
There aren't many here on our narrow island.
Right. You have moors.
We do indeed, yeah. What we have is a lot of sea.
Yeah. No, it's true.
You can take some home in a bucket if you like. So.
Yeah.
We won't miss it. But at the end of the day, those are still universal themes. But the music somehow, that's an interesting question. How can you make your music specific to the story, accessible to those of us who are a further step away from that context?
Obviously, at that point, I didn't know I was coming here, so I wasn't necessarily writing for an audience that wouldn't have been familiar with American folk. I listen to a lot of American folk music. It's my favorite genre. I'm a big bluegrass person. I'm a big, as most New Yorkers are, I'm obsessed with folk music.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Because it's such an urban environment.
Yes, it is. No, it's because I think a lot of people on the coasts, including the West Coast, it's their connection to the heartland of America in a way that doesn't involve going into Trump country, because there's plenty of folk musicians who are, hardcore blue liberals, and they make great music. And so,
politics is not necessarily connected to creativity.
No,
I agree with that. It's just interesting, actually. I'm just thinking, forgive me to constantly do this, the British parallel is that urban dwellers often pine for a kind of agrarian paradise into which they might pop in for the weekend.
Yes.
It doesn't actually appeal to me per se, but it does for an awful lot of people. So it's, and that's where British folk comes from, the countryside, not from the city per se. So anyway, forgive me. So that's interesting. But of course, American folk and bluegrass is still an international thing. Yeah.
But I'm also, at my heart, I am a musical theater writer and performer.
Yes, quite.
And so I.
By the way, excellent, well done, good choice.
Oh, thanks. So I think I just sort of tend to write songs. I write music that interests me. So I try to never write a song that I feel ambivalent about. I like to go in and once I have it, I feel like I can listen to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it has to be good enough, actually.
It has to be good, yeah. The hope is that when I finally get the music out, because I'm scared, it's scary playing around music, especially for a global audience, especially because I don't really play guitar, so I learned guitar for this.
Well, you carried it off sufficiently that I wouldn't have known.
So. Well, thank you. The hope is that it is, specific enough. Obviously, the guitar adds a lot to the style of it, and it wouldn't sound the same on a piano, which is my main instrument, but...
your only other alternative is a banjo, and that suggests a different tone again.
Yes, exactly.
Which to a British ear, by the way, is very chirpy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't do the darker things which I know it can do in America. Sorry.
I know the American perception of the banjo has been very much shaped by the film Deliverance. I don't know if you've ever seen Deliverance.
Oh yes, fully aware of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's fine. I won't mention barrels.
Yeah.
But whereas the banjo is, or the ukulele, but we associate the banjo and the banjolele with the ukulele in this country is mostly associated with somebody called George Formby, who was a 1930s film comedy.
Yeah.
So he sang comedy songs. Yeah, exactly. Yes, you're miming exactly the kind of person George Formby is.
When I think of British banjos, I think, sorry for this tangent, but when I think of British people in banjos, I think of one episode of Jeeves and Wooster where Bertie joins a minstrel group. So I don't know if that's the best association, but it is. I do love that show. So,
but also you've got the silly ass upper class twit
Yes.
playing the banjo,
Yeah,
and that is
exactly.
the association.
He loves.
It's an idiot.
Yeah. And boy, he is. My God, he was so good.
P.G. Woodhouse, of course, being a famous lyricist, he wrote the. Well, I don't need to tell you that, but he wrote a lot with Kern and rewrote some Ira Gershwin lyrics with Ira Gershwin's permission later on. I learned recently. Anyway,
Did he write the lyrics? I mean, he wouldn't have. Who did write the lyrics for By Jeeves? I don't know.
oh, you mean Andrew Lloyd Webber's By Jeeves?
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to say somebody. I think it might be Richard Stilgoe or Don Black
sure.
or somebody like that, but I don't know. Actually, off the top of my head, that's a very great failure of mine, I'm afraid. I should tell you.
I know. I asked because we're on a musical theatre
Yes,
podcast, and I think, well, who's the next? Here's the nearest person who might know that.
But thank you, and if you've quite rightly shown me up.
No, I mean, I don't know.
No, but here's my question then. Let's go back to, so you'd written the songs, you got the kernel of the idea from this New York Post story, but, the two things, clearly, nice match, but doing it is a very different thing again. So seeing the story inspired you, but what actually inspired you to then sit down and write it? Because, the idea and the act are not the same.
Yeah. I mean, I had been wanting to write something for a while that was very rooted in, like, Americana, sort of the Southern Gothic style.
Oh, nice phrase.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of larger genre in American literature. And I think it can mean many things. Southern Gothic could be As I Lay Dying,
yes.
or it could be any number of things. But when I hear it, I think of Gothic horror in the South, which is probably not what it actually means. But my mom gave me a book when I was in my teens called Wisconsin Death Trip. Wisconsin Death Trip is a book of photographs by this photographer and newspaper clippings from this one county in Wisconsin where, for some reason, over about a century, a bunch of bizarre, terrible things happened. Children are freezing by the side of the road, and
goodness.
Yeah, I mean, it's really those stories, and that I think I kept wanting to do like an anthology show of stories like that, and I would write down these little things. It's like the story of the I wouldn't write the story, but I would write the idea of the story of, like, I had one that I never put in, but it was the story of the person who kept cracking their back. They thought they had like a crick in their neck so hard that they eventually twisted their body beyond recognition. That's the type of thing I think about.
You're in the land of Poe, aren't you?
Yes, I'm always in the land of Poe. I love Poe. Poe was my guy in middle school. I was a middle school.
He's your literary
Poe fan.
godfather.
Yes, absolutely. And those places right between, in that hinterland between having a troubled mind and spirituality. There's what's real and what's a ghost.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah,
actually.
It is. And part of my goal with this show was that it's never absolutely made clear whether or not the supernatural element is real.
Yeah.
Not that there's a supernatural element. Spoilers.
No, but we have mentioned the word ghost story, so
yes,
some
well,
things
I
are
suppose,
implicit, aren't
yeah.
they? Yes, quite. But I consider myself an arch rationalist, but I didn't in any way feel negative towards this. In fact, quite the reverse. I feel incredibly positive. I think you can go in. If you're open to wonder and amazement in a cultural and literary point of view, then this has got lots of things to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So what was its gestation period? I mean,
Well-
were you still in COVID when you were writing it, and did that give you time, or did here's the interesting thing. At the moment this year, a lot of people are saying I did this or came up with the idea in COVID, and that's fine. But it hasn't come to an end. But the lockdown. It's
been a
period,
while.
Yeah, but the lockdown period has come to an end, which means we're back to our time poor lives rather than our time rich lives.
Yeah. I had written most of the music during COVID and then stopped because, as happened with many COVID projects, I sort of gave up on it.
Oh.
Or not gave up on it, but just didn't have it.
It went dormant.
It went dormant, yes. And then I pitched it as my Princeton thesis because I was interested in... I had never done a solo piece before, and I really wanted to stretch a little bit and also sort of challenge myself to learn the guitar well enough to do that, and to I'd been studying stand-up and I'd been studying solo storytelling, and I wanted to sort of bring all those things together and make it an hour of stand-up that becomes a ghost story, basically. That was the original intention of it, and obviously it's veered more into being storytelling.
I was going to say, that is quite the reverse direction than I would argue that we got.
Yeah,
yes,
it is.
How interesting that its genesis is that way.
Well, I'm a huge stand-up fan, and I always wanted to be able to do it, but I guess I can't do it without diverting into horror.
Well, actually, it's interesting that acting and stand-up are getting closer and closer, I think, as I see that now. I'm not going to name it, but I saw at least one show. Well, I saw two shows. One was a stand-up, and one was advertised as a stand-up, but it's very clearly an actor giving us his stand-up act, if that makes sense. And it feels like a different kind of spontaneity, actually. Yeah. So anyway, forgive me.
It is. And this, as you say, the spontaneity is such a huge part of it, and it's hard to do when everything's written out. And I try sometimes to sort of... because I'm an improv person also, so I try and throw in a little, if only for me, if only sort of
keep
me fresh and keep me in it. But yeah, so I ended up writing the monologue portion of it in about a week.
Right, it's very accomplished.
And it's all very sort of stream of consciousness. And then we started working with the director, Sabina Jaffrey, who's also here with us, and she was great in sort of helping pare it down to, especially for Princeton, but then especially for here, because we have to have a 45-minute show, and in Princeton it was an hour long.
It's the Edinburgh slot, isn't it?
Yes, the Edinburgh slot. So much of our preparation for this summer was preparing our load in and load out. We would run through it at home, which was really... it felt like that was the show, The show is getting in and out of the theater. We know what to do in the middle. So she's been tremendously helpful in sort of finding what's actually interesting in there and helping to differentiate those two characters, because I think that was sort of the biggest challenge, was finding completely different physicalities for both of those, actually three people, and more if you count other characters.
Yeah. But the two principal voices.
The two principal voices, yeah. And as you can probably tell, if the eagle-eyed among you, there's quite a bit of the woman in black in there, except that I've just sort of taken the two characters from Woman in Black and mushed them into one person.
Once again, I think you're underselling yourself. I think you're right, there's a resonance, but the idea, you haven't just done that. These are fully fledged characters in their own right. But most literary characters have some kind of they often have many grandparents.
Well, sure. I mean, that's why I say it. I mean, I'm not under the impression that I've just done that, but I was raised, the phrase in our household is every work of art is in conversation with every other work of art.
Yes. Oh, nice.
So, when I mention things like Woman in Black, I don't mean I'm doing a direct copy, but I mean, when I start a project, I think of everything I've seen that could possibly influence that.
What's in the context of American Gothic or Gothic, yes.
Yeah. So I would think of, as I've said, it's Wisconsin Death Trip. It's a little bit Stephen King. It's a little bit of...
It's a fusion meal of its cultural sources.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Because that's where I think the creative... I get hung up sometimes when people say, oh, this is completely original. It's not. Nothing is completely original.
No, nothing is. But you have to. That's a fairly full-on. It is. You're right. At one level, almost nothing is truly creative.
Yeah.
But on the other hand,
yeah. I mean, I think it's what you find in the overlap that is interesting, which again is why I pitch it as a half stand-up comedy, half ghost story, half musical, because I think people are interested to see like where do those things actually overlap, and clearly there are places where it does overlap.
But I think that takes us very nicely into performance, because writing is one thing, performance is the other, and it is the performance that brings it's a symbiotic relationship, of course, and as the writer you're closer than most, but it is in performance where things come alive or fail. You could have the best narrative in the world, but if you've got a team of terrible actors, it's not going to go anywhere. This is an excellent narrative. The songs serve their function in that narrative, but most importantly it is you in the room and the audience, and in an intimate room as well, because that's what Edinburgh affords so wonderfully. Literally 1 metre, 2 metres away from you. We can see you tapping your toes, if you're tapping your toes, as you do in one of the songs. You stamp once, I think, as well. So,
I do. That's my favourite.
But the fact that actually that might not be seen on a larger stage or a proscenium arch, or that, it's the intimacy is beautiful. But you ruled the room the moment we walked in. But it's this show of three halves, as you rather nicely put it. And we touched on this yesterday when we first met, but I love the fact that there's a ghost story and you can play it as a straight ghost story. There's a lot of dark humour, lots of very delicious dark humour in it, and you can go for the comedy aspects of it. And then, of course, the musical aspects are much more infrastructure, so you can't really build them up or take them down. I mean, in a way, they're part of the building. But last night, it was quite interesting to me because my personal taste is towards that dark comedy, and I thought it was very enjoyable. And I was laughing, but I was noticing that not a lot of other people were, and the room very much wanted what I'm going to call a speech mark straight ghost story, and that was the direction of travel I think the room had to go in, and so we went in it. But you said something very interesting about how you have to read a room and see where they want to go every night, so the show can be totally different with the same text, the same performer and the same songs.
It can.
I think this is fabulously interesting. How do you navigate that?
I think it's I as I said last night when we were talking, I think I can often tell in the first 15-ish minutes where an audience is because it's just me up there. I'm making quite a bit of eye contact with everyone in the room, and as you said, people are very close to me, and so I am able to read the energies of the people in there, and I think in general, if they're not as much feeling the jokes, I think they're here because they want to be spooked out a little bit. So I'm gonna try and pump up the creepiness a little bit, and that's really
torch under the chin moment.
It's there's still a lot of opportunities for laughter in there, and the stories are written in such a way that if you want them to be funny, they can be funny. If you're sitting in the audience and you think this is ridiculous, I'm going to laugh. You absolutely can.
And
There's laughs.
I couldn't not.
Yes, of course. I heard you, and actually, I really enjoyed your laughter last night.
Oh, thank you.
But yeah, I mean, I think that is maybe the place where stand-up comes into it most, is like being able to read a room.
It is the most spontaneous of the three things you were describing.
Yeah, we saw, after the show last night, my friends and I went to a free stand-up show last night in the back of a pub, and it was good. But there was one, I won't say their name, but because I don't remember their name. But but there was, you can sense a performer feeling betrayed when people aren't taking their stuff the way they want it to. And in stand-up, you have to be able to roll with the punches.
You
and
can't
as we
be
were,
precious, can
no,
you?
you can't be precious. And as we were walking away, my friend very aptly said, "You can't build an act on yelling at the audience for not laughing."
Not a successful act. No.
Yeah. And I think that's also true of something like this, where it's like, I can't tell the audience what they should find funny and what they should find scary, because I took a class with Mike Birbiglia, who's coming here in a few weeks, who's probably one of the best storytellers we have, and so much of this show is indebted to his style, and in fact there's two very, very overt references to him in there.
He doesn't run a petrol station on the side.
He doesn't run a he has a show called Sleepwalk with Me, where and And he once said in one of our classes, he said, as soon as you tell the audience what to think, they will not go there with you.
Yeah.
As soon as you say, here's the funny part, they'll be like, fuck you. We don't want to laugh. We don't want to laugh at the part you think is funny. We want to laugh at the part we think is funny. So there's an
the audience is king as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We are there to serve.
Well, that is the nature.
Yeah.
But also, the audience can teach you.
Absolutely.
And have the audience taught you anything? I mean, you've been doing it for 3 or 4 nights here?
Yes, and we did a lot back in Princeton. We did 10 performances back in Princeton over the year. So we learned there what people... And those were in similarly very small spaces. Yeah. And so we learned what people respond to and what people... what people expect to be coming and what people don't expect to be coming. So that was very helpful, and we actually reshaped a little bit of it around that. And that is like, we were reworking our set.
Which is a very natural and good thing to do.
Yeah. So I think we had a lot of good practice with that before coming here. The Edinburgh audiences have been incredibly good. Not just in terms of, I'm happy that people are coming, but also the people there seem invested, which is really good, especially for a show that happens at 10:30 at night.
Although that is almost the best time for this show, I think.
Yeah, well, that's why we picked it. I didn't want to do this show in the middle of the day.
Yes.
It wouldn't feel right. But, a friend of mine who had done Edinburgh before called me and said, you're going to get a lot of drunks.
Oh.
And that is true sometimes. Well, our first show was a somewhat rowdy one in that some people came 10 minutes late and left half an hour early, and the show's only 50 minutes long.
Well, also, that's just disrespectful in my view. I mean, it's okay to leave a show, but you can't...
Right at, the darkest, quietest moment in the show, people headed out. They were talking the whole time. They were very drunk.
Yes, terrible. Sorry.
But apart from that, I have been so overjoyed. And, of course, this is my first time doing this. This is my team's first time doing this. We've all just been sort of learning on the go. And we're having a total blast. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it too, because, as I say, it was a gift to the audience last night. I mean, it was just delightful. It was a wonderful piece. Well, it still is a wonderful piece. I mean, it wasn't just wonderful last night. But I am also interested to explore the audience thing a little bit more. Saying that, particularly in the Princeton one, I think you said that, the audience taught you some things and you've honed it. But do you find the audience differs? Well, we've already said the audience differs on night to night on what it wants in terms of its taste vis-a-vis the spectrum of comedy to ghost story. But have there been surprises for you as well? That, suddenly things you thought that weren't, things that were just things turned out to be things. Write that down.
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of ones I can mention without
spoiling.
Spoiling. In general, what's been most pleasing is that you never know. I mean, it's. I think it's hard to scare people now, because there's so much horror out there, and people, we've seen very, very scary things, and I think there was something very not surprising, but I guess pleasantly surprising about doing this at Princeton with a bunch of people my age who have, witnessed the worst horrors in the world,
yes,
in general, and going, and going into a dark room with people, and if you tell a story, you can still scare people, and I think that was nice, and. The highest compliment for this type of show is that people have nightmares after.
But it is ultimately a social thing, and that's why I think storytelling in the dark, shall we call it, will actually never go out of fashion. Yes, you can go and see the American film that's got all the money in the world spent on it to scare the living doodads out of you, but that's a different kind of scare. That's a visceral kind of scare. Well, I say visceral, actually. It's a I'm going to call that symptomatic scaring. That is a response, but it's a passive response. Yeah. Something has happened, you react to it. You don't have a connection with it because there's always a sort of Brechtian dissonance dissonance, if you want that, from the screen. In a theatre, you have a greater connection, but commercial theatre, of course, has to put you in a larger venue, so you're just that little bit away. In the room we're in last night, that could have been a living room. You could have been telling that story on Christmas evening when the wider family was there. You could easily have 20 people. I know you have more than 20 people, but you could easily have 20 people in a room. That is something that's been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Definitely thousands of years.
My goal was always, this wasn't feasible at Princeton, but my goal was always to do it in a living room, because it feels like something
it's
that...
It's a parlour story.
Everyone should be sitting on couches and cushions on the floor. I remember, there are some Edinburgh shows that have greatly influenced like how I feel these types of stories should be told. There was one where when I was a kid, it's like we were on a tour of the Edinburgh vaults, and they bring us into one of the vaults and they leave us there in the darkness, which already is horrifying. And then the characters come out and they start doing the story, and that I think is like, oh no, you're not safe because you're not in a theater. You're in this very clearly haunted space. And then
it's an unknown environment.
And then, of course, one of the scariest things I've ever seen, which is still playing this year, and I recommend everyone go see it because I'm going to see it about 10 times, is any of the Darkfield shows, the shows that are in the shipping crates.
Oh, yes.
Because, that is similar to this, it's a very old-fashioned style of scaring people, because probably at old carnivals they would have rooms where you go in and you do a fake seance, or you do a seance, and they use all the tricks in the book. They use all the smoke and mirrors, and it's fake, but it feels so real. And what I love about Darkfield is that they put you in there and you're in complete darkness, and they only have to do a little bit of work once you're in complete darkness for it to feel like you're in a room with everyone and there is a ghost in there. And that's like, humans...
You feed off each other as well.
Yeah, you feed off each other. It's a very sort of group delusion thing, which I think is very important for this type of horror theater. Horror theater is something I'm very interested in.
It's coming across, but it's marvellous.
Well, I wrote my thesis on it.
Yeah.
Just that group delusion of you're all in this room. And, the human body is very, very suggestible. And the human brain is very suggestible. So that even though in your conscious mind you understand that you're just in a dark room wearing headphones and something is happening in those headphones, because of the way that our brains are programmed, it does feel like something wrong is happening.
And the body is very acutely aware of things which are wrong, because it's got thousands of years or millions of years of development to sort of get to that point.
And evolutionarily, like when we actually can't see anything,
you're relying on your other.
If I could have total darkness in this show at certain moments, I would. But of course, that's not feasible in a room that's a conference room.
Yeah. There would also be a green sign saying fire exit.
Well, oh my God. Well, when we originally did it at Princeton, we were put in this. We were put in sort of a studio theater, which is just a studio, which is just a classroom, and all of the walls are bright white. And it has the two absolute brightest exit signs that have ever been seen on this earth, and
powered by two suns.
So yes, exactly. So when we did there was a moment of like total blackout in the original, and when it went total blackout, the room was just green.
Yes, not quite the the feel.
So it wasn't as visceral as I would have wanted it. We did get it later in some of our more immersive spaces, but that was tough.
But once again, that's a sensory thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Funny enough, I think completely ties in with what you're saying. But just being in a white room is, even in a dark environment, it's more twilighty than black, as it were. So it's we're more alive in the dark because we have to be, I suppose.
And I have to say that I'm not a designer. I'm just someone who thinks about this stuff a lot, and I tried to sort of write it in, but I had incredible designers with me, and I think a lot of what people are coming out of the show saying is that it's great that we can create the sense of atmosphere, and that is all Eliana Abraham, who did the sound. The sound, I think, adds a tremendous amount to this show.
It's more than a sound; it's a soundscape.
It's a soundscape, and it's. We talked early on about like what the sound of this desert is, because it's not just tumbleweeds and dust. It's this sort of continuous musical drone, and that drone feeds into all the songs. And I mean, she's absolutely brilliant. And then Chloe Satenberg, who had never done projections before, came to us just saying, I'm interested in like trying to do projections for a full show. And the projection, we didn't even know that we wanted projections. And I think they add like so much to that.
Well, they're
atmosphere.
beautiful because they don't shift focus. Actually, they add to the context. They don't add to the. It's very easy for visuals to steal focus, and they don't do that. They add, and so they're contextual. They add to the bed on which you're sort of telling the story, I think. So yes, in that sense, 100% successful. Yeah.
The original idea was that this main character was a photographer. So originally there was like a big...
There's your Wisconsin...
exactly. Yeah.
Through.
So there was a slide projector built into the show, and there was going to be all sort of fun haunting happening with that slide projector. And maybe that'll come back in, but that's gone now. But I think that, what Chloe's managed to find in the projectors is this, like, these images that sort of, like, fade in and fade out, sort of like apparitions.
A haunt is the word I was going to use, funny enough. Yes, absolutely. Yes, the Victorians would be delighted.
Yes.
It's right up their street.
No, I mean, I think that, seriously, I think the Victorians mastered the art of theatrical haunting, Pepper's Ghost and all that.
Oh, yes.
Which I'm sad we can't use in this, but we don't have a pane of glass that we could fit in our carry-on that we could bring over here.
Or get out in 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure there's at least one show in the Fringe this year that has a giant pane of glass as their only set. I mean, I think that so much of... I mean, as I've been saying, like, so much of the... Obviously, there's the text and there's the performance, but I think so much of what makes theatrical horror scary and visceral is design and the place that you're in. And obviously we're in a very modern looking space, so the design has to go even further of trying to build the atmosphere out from stage into the space so that we all feel like we're in the same.
Oh yes, you're ameliorating the physical context into your new dramatic context. Now, obviously, you've proven to me that you're a tremendously accomplished performer, musician. I know you said you've only learned the guitar for this, but I don't know, it seemed pretty good to me. And of course, a writer. Now, that makes you a triple threat in many senses. But I know that you've also, forgive me, you're a young man, but you've also had a pretty impressive career up to this point in wearing your acting shoes. Is that correct? And I think the words Dear Evan Hansen has to fly into this somehow.
Dear Evan Hansen is it's a huge part of my life.
It's a huge part to have had in your life.
Yeah, it's a huge. It was a big shift in my life because I was in college and I was a sophomore, and I had been in to audition for them many times, and so I was just sort of continually going in thinking like, well, it's good to go in and get seen.
Interview practice.
Yeah, exactly. And then I booked an understudy role on the tour right as I was meant to go back to school for the spring semester. And so already it was just such a huge sort of uprooting of all the plans. But it was so fun, and I learned so much, and I made some incredible friends on it. And then, of course, I was out there for a year and 2 months until March of 2020, when...
So that is a big chunk of your life, isn't it?
Yeah, a huge chunk of my life. And, I mean, it feels much longer. Time just moves differently out there. Yeah. Especially when you're in a different place, a different theater every week, not unlike this.
Well, it's almost it's repertory in the old-fashioned sense. Yeah, moving from one landlady to another, using the old theatrical terms. But
it's a very old-fashioned theatrical experience to sort of pack up and hit the road with your show. And obviously it was a very nice and cushy experience. Cushy in the sense that we had a show that people liked.
It was already a success.
It was already a success, and we had a built-in audience, and people love that show.
They do indeed, yes.
And I feel very proud to have been a part of it because I also like that show.
And you were understudying. So who were you understudying?
I was understudying Connor Murphy, who's and then Jared Kleinman, who is Evans,
the friend.
Yes, the funny friend.
Yes.
And I think they.
But he's more than just a funny friend. There's real pain in him.
Oh, the deep pain. Yeah. Well, I think that I was very lucky because I was around at a time where they really needed someone who was both tall and a little scary looking and also funny.
What a thing to put on a CV.
Yeah. Well, that's what it's. Yeah, right across the top of my resume. Tall, scary looking, but also a little funny. So I felt very lucky that I got a lot of time with both of those characters. I mean, that's the fun thing about being an understudy. The not fun thing is sitting around.
Yeah. The night you're not called.
Yes. Or you are called, but you sit backstage the entire show. And of course, I got a lot of reading done, and that was fun. But the real fun of it is, getting the opportunity to play more than one character in a show with only 8 characters. So it really does make. We had a fair few. There's 8 characters in the show. We had 9 understudies.
Goodness, right? Okay.
So if everyone in the main cast had been sick, we could have still done the show.
Let's never forget that was COVID came along. That was a possibility. This is pre-COVID, I guess.
Yes, this was pre-COVID, and even after they came back, I think they had 9, maybe 10 understudies.
Well, you can't be too careful.
Yeah, no, you can't.
Certainly for a professional show.
And post-COVID, a lot of those understudies went on much more often. But it does make a difference when an understudy goes on in a show like that, and I think that was the most that show is very actor forward. It's very performance forward. Yes. Obviously it's an incredibly written script. The songs are beautiful. The script can do all the work if you like, but what I love about that show and what made it exciting was that they were always focused on how can we make the performances not just clear and good, but specific to the person playing them. And so a lot of times, I've only had a 1 or 2 understudy experiences, but when you're an understudy in a show that big, it can feel like they want you to go on stage and be a carbon copy of whoever's doing it. And what I appreciated about that show is that they want you to go on stage and be your version of that character. So I effectively got to play 2 characters on that show. So I am very grateful for that.
But also, I think that's a marvellous way of keeping a show alive, because actually every performer is going to do it differently, even if they're attempting a cup of coffee. So don't do that. Do go for the interpretation within the text. Obviously, you're not going off madly. But then that also means the other actors have got to react spontaneously to your version of Jared or your version of Connor. And that keeps everything fresh, because the danger of carbon copies, I don't need to tell you, but is that everything becomes a carbon copy overall. Yeah. And you're just watching a facsimile of a show that opened a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, rather than seeing tonight's performance, which is in its sense the first performance of this performance, if that makes sense.
No, exactly. And I think for some shows, the carbon copy thing makes more sense. If it's a show like Cats and you need to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, you do need to be a carbon copy. When something is that
choreographed, though, that builds into that.
I think so. Whereas Evan Hansen is not. It's not a dance show. No. There's one song that has dancing in it.
Yeah. Well, you could do Evan Hansen on the radio, I think. That's. I mean, you'd lose something, but the narrative is strong enough to carry that, and it's Sorry, I spoke over
you could do it in a movie, but I don't think anyone's ever tried.
Moving on.
It is such a performance first show, and it really does knock everyone out of the. It can't be a show where you go on autopilot.
Oh no, crikey!
Because it's just so. The acting is just so built into it.
The first time I saw it, I reached the end of Act 1 and I thought, this is a thriller.
Yeah.
I genuinely couldn't work out how it was going to end, and I was actually had little butterflies in my stomach, because the way it was This was in London.
Yeah, you saw
But the
it in
way
London.
I was reading it was that I thought there was a very good chance that Evan Hanson was going to commit suicide, and I thought it was going to be that kind of tragedy.
Wow.
And that's, it was a psychological. It is a psychological.
You were
drama, but it's a psychological thriller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What really interests me, if you want to talk about sort of musical theater theory and structure,
you know
for a
I do.
second, I know you do, and I always do. What really interests me about the way that show, there's no productions left now, so I can say what I really think. The way that was marketed is that song, "You Will Be Found," at the end of Act 1, has been pushed and pushed as this huge anthem.
That's the very word.
Yeah, and it is an anthem, and it's a beautiful song, and it's huge, and it's like Christian. It's a Christian stadium rock, and it makes you feel good when you listen to it. But what makes you feel it in the show is that within the context of the show, it has a completely different meaning for the person singing it and the person hearing it, which is that it's a threat, right? You hear this song, and it's like, "Ba-da-na-na, you will be found, you will be found." Everyone, we have all these virtual chorus members and, all these pre-recorded voices. Yeah. And, everyone on stage is looking at Evan singing "You Will Be Found." It's a threat. He knows he's going to be found out for this lie that he's been telling. And that's why it's so funny whenever I see, the youth choruses singing "You Will Be Found," because obviously it's a great song for youth choirs, but
it's outside of the context of the piece in which it actually works in a different way. There's another avatar to that, which is actually from a film. Meet Me in St. Louis is where the song "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" comes from. And that's been a Christmas standard for 1,000 years and is sung speech marks straight. You see it on the film, and Judy Garland's got tears in her eyes because the whole thing has a totally different meaning. So it's almost a tragic song. It's just been picked up, turned on its axis a bit, and plucked into and thrown into the community. Yeah. But in a way, that's sort of wonderful. But I agree with everything you're saying.
It happens all the time with Sondheim too, where Sondheim,
now you're talking.
Sondheim, because I love talking about Sondheim, and I could talk about Sondheim for the next hour. But what Sondheim was so good at was that at his core he was a song and dance man, and he was a very old-fashioned writer in the sense that he knew that what audiences want more than anything is to hear a song they like. And I think this is something that a lot of Sondheim sort of impersonators have lost, which is that they write musically complex songs because they feel the audience wants that complexity completely in the music, whereas Sondheim, his brilliance was that he would take songs that could be from Golden Age musicals, and he and his book writers would recontextualize them so that they have completely different meanings. And I think of something like "Nothing's Gonna Harm You" or "Pretty Woman," beautiful, beautiful songs that if they were from any other musical would just be like
the one
nice little ballads.
Yes.
But the context is so important, and I think you can draw a straight line from that type of thing over to Dear Evan Hansen, and they're beautiful pop songs, in the same way that musical theater was influencing pop back in the golden age of Broadway, and now pop is influencing. It's this sort of this cycle.
I've absolutely seen that. Yes, quite.
But the context and the brilliance of the book of that show is what gives them the weight that they don't even necessarily have when you're just listening to them on the album.
I really would like to talk to you about Sondheim for an hour. Well, I'm going to say, Asher, that I have a feeling this is one of those conversations that could go off in lots of different tangents, but I want to bring it back to the show you've got here in Edinburgh, which is a masterpiece. I think my question must be what is the future of this show, and how can people sort of keep in touch with you and it? Because you're clearly a talent to be watching. In an auditorium first, but in a more general sense, what's coming next?
Well, I have a first up, thank you.
Well, you've done all the work, in fairness.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of connecting with this show, obviously, if we're still running by the time this goes to air, please come see us. Yeah. You can follow us at Mine at the Fringe on Instagram. That's at the word, not the sign.
Yes.
And if you'd like to hear any of the music, most of the some of the songs are on Bandcamp now. Bandcamp/Asher Muldoon, I think is what it is. If you look up Asher Muldoon Bandcamp, you'll find some of the music, and you can stream the songs there. You can buy the album if you like. I'm going back to America after this, and with this show, I would like this to not be the end. I would like this show to maybe find a small space in New York and do a few shows, if only because I have friends there who haven't seen it yet, and I'd like to tell them the story. Of course, it's one of those things that I could just invite 10 people over to my apartment one night and do it for them, which is the fun part about this show.
It's a portable show in that sense.
It is a very portable show. And I have a few other things in the works. I'm actually, part of the reason I chose to perform here at Surgeons Hall is because I'm currently writing a show inspired by Burke and Hare.
Oh, well, Edinburgh's the place for that.
It is absolutely the place for that. So this is
and
sort
Surgeons Hall particularly,
yes.
You're quite right. Sorry, all the residencies are there.
Every time, whenever I have a free moment, I just hobble on over to the museum, which is about 40 feet away, and I go see Burke's Death Mask.
Oh, well, am I not right in thinking also, isn't there they made something out of his skin as well? I think there's a book
there's
cover
a
or
pocket book made out of his skin.
That's exactly what it is, yes, quite. It's a different time, isn't it?
And then his skeleton is somewhere in town. I think it's over at the Royal College. No, the Royal College is over here. Anyway, I'll find it somewhere. Yeah. It's like a scavenger hunt.
It's not going anywhere.
Well, as far as we know. Unless I have anything to do with it.
You're next door.
Yeah. So this is sort of a half performance week, half
research.
Yeah, half research. And just sort of tracing the paths of that because, it's sort of, you could call it communing with the dead. And so that's on the horizon. And yeah, if you're interested in keeping up with me, I'm at Asher Muldoon on the artist formerly known as Twitter. I will still keep referring to it as Twitter, as will everyone.
As will everyone, right, yes.
I'm not on Instagram yet, but I might give in soon. I think I have to.
I think we're all moving into a broader number of social media just because that's the way the world's going.
It is. I've avoided Instagram this long, but I feel this is the time, maybe.
A photograph of you next to a skeleton, maybe the opening.
Just give me a big thumbs up. Yeah, and I'm available to contact through my website, and if you're interested in the show or interested in learning more, I'm always happy to respond to emails. And yeah, I hope this is the first of several performances. I won't say many, I'll say several.
Well, let me put it this way. The show you've written, mine, is a show that deserves to go on for a lot longer. Fun enough, I think it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's clever, it's sensual in the sense of sensory, and my goodness, it clutches the audience by the throat and doesn't let go in the most wonderful way. But I'd like to see your next show, and I'd like to see the show after that, and I'd like to see you in performance. I'd like to see what you're writing, because actually I think you've got an interesting voice and a beautiful performance, and together that's pretty much perfection. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Musical Talk. And that was the absolutely wonderful and hugely talented Asher Muldoon. He impressed me on the stage, and he impressed me off the stage. And he's one of those people I could very happily talk to for a very long time about musical theatre or about anything. He has a vast breadth of cultural understanding and is as intelligent as he is charming. And when I say he is very charming, you'll understand what a compliment I'm paying. If you'd like to find out more about Asher's work, or indeed this or his other musicals, because he's written a number, go to his website, which is so easy to find because it's called www.ashermuldoon.com. Asher being A-S-H-E-R, and that surname being M-U-L-D-O-O-N. And you can find a wealth of material about Asher and his works, both as a writer and as an actor, and in all the other spheres in which he has enormous talents. So do pop along to that website. And there's a page dedicated to mine, a solo ghost story musical, which also includes links to some of the songs. And some of those songs are also available on Bandcamp under Asher's name. And remember, if you see his name in a credit for a show coming up, either as a writer or as a performer, do see if you can find the time to go and see it. I don't think you'll be disappointed at all. Well, that brings this episode to an end. I do hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Asher and hearing at least one of the songs from Mine, which Musical Talk definitely identified as a 5-star musical at last year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Join us again next week, or whenever, for something completely different. The world of musical theatre is ever expanding and has so many different facets, and Musical Talk tries to reflect that, which means that every episode is completely different to the one before, and indeed to the one that follows. So, do try and listen to us again in the future if you can. But for the time being, I could, if you want, go through the usual rigmarole of making some weak pun or building up very slowly to that final word, which, as we know, will bring the conversational elements of this episode to an end. But that would be just wasting your time. And as I've explained what I might do, there's no point actually in doing it. So I'm just going to go straight to that word without in any way wasting your time and building up to it. Isn't that good? Oh dear, I don't think I've done that terribly well, but never mind. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2024, except for the song, where the copyright remains with Asher Muldoon as the creator. And my thanks go to Asher for allowing me to play his wonderful song in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on the usual social media networks like Facebook, Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. And if you want to follow me on the latter, you can. At Musical Talk Thos. Yeah, as long as you're happy with that as a sort of a way of going ahead. I'm just going to ask you something terribly dull. You may not have had a chance to have breakfast, but have you had breakfast?
I have not had breakfast.
Right, what would you have had if you had it just breakfast?
I almost, as I often do when I'm here, I almost stopped in a Greg's. I got a sausage roll because...
You are acculturated.
I am...
And if I ask you something and you want to have a little bit of thinking time, or you go a lot, I take that out as well. So you'll sound like a genius.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, everyone wants to look good.
I do sometimes say a lot.
It's human.
Yeah.
Ha ha ha. It's going to be that kind of conversation.
Yeah.